Chapman. We did learn just yesterday after the passing of Beckstrom that the charge would be upgraded to first-degree murder. But to explain exactly how all of this will play out, I do want to bring in Ronald Chapman, a legal expert and the host of the Off-Air YouTube show. Thank you so much for taking the time here to be with us and help kind of break it all down.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And first off, I did want to ask if you can kind of break down. We are, of course, just days after the incident unfolded. There's still a lot of questions, but we're talking about a potential first-degree murder charge. And there's also been mention of the death penalty. Explain exactly how all of that could work.
Yeah, we have a very interesting case here, although incredibly tragic. If these National Guard members were activated under the federal government, that would be under Title 10, then they would be considered federal officials. And of course, the shooting, the murdering of a federal official means that it immediately becomes a federal offense and under federal jurisdiction. Now, this would be considered a crime of terrorism anyway, which may very well be under federal jurisdiction, but this makes it much easier. And of course, now that we have a service member passing away, we have a murder charge and potentially first-degree murder charge, which would qualify for capital punishment under our federal statutes. And I imagine that's exactly what prosecutors will seek, unless there's some other mitigating reason that they should walk away from the first-degree murder charge.
What do they have to prove to essentially be able to even consider the death penalty?
Well, so there's two separate trials ordinarily in a federal case where there's the death penalty. The first one is the guilt phase and the second is the death phase. Different evidence comes in during that death phase where some mitigating information may come into play. Here's what the prosecutors likely will talk about. We have somebody who traveled for 5 days across the country, likely acquired a firearm, probably a high caliber weapon, obtained ammunition, and then of course, intentionally shot another person or people and continued to aim and target at others. The incidents that took place well before the shooting add to intent, but also reloading the firearm and pointing at other individuals starts to show intent. And unless there is some sort of intervening excuse or reason as to why this happens, such as insanity, likely they would have enough for a first-degree murder charge and conviction.
And I want to talk a little bit about the defense. Again, there's a lot of unknowns here. We don't have even close to all of the information. We just have kind of the bits and pieces that have been released by FBI Director Kash Patel and Jeanine Pirro, the U.S. attorney there for the District of Columbia. But what could the defense argue? Because it sounds as though, from what investigators are saying and the prosecutors are saying at this point, it sounds like they could potentially have a cut and dry case.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you have an individual that has traveled this far in order to engage in an action like this, you have to look at their sanity, right? And of course, we have somebody who reportedly served in an Afghan unit over in Afghanistan during combat. I was in Afghanistan myself. I know full well what that individual would have seen and some pretty horrific stuff. And I imagine there may be some element of a post-traumatic stress defense available here. Although I will tell you, not likely. We see very intentional actions. This person was able to navigate across country, which is not something that we would normally see somebody with that type of mental insanity be able to do. But also, there are cases all over of service members who did have post-traumatic stress disorder and committed acts. I've prosecuted many of them where this was not considered a sufficient defense to get them off of some sort of first-degree murder charge.
Domestic terrorism, we kind of already went over this just a little bit, but what has to be proven for that charge in general? Because we did hear President Trump very quick to say this was a terrorist act. We also heard similar rhetoric there from Jeanine Pirro and Kash Patel. So how do you, I guess, go about proving domestic terrorism? What does it really mean overall from a legal perspective?
Yeah, the one element that is most important here for the label of domestic terrorism is the intent to influence some sort of United States policy or some sort of political policy. Now here, domestic terrorism isn't its own standalone charge. A federal official like Title 10 we see here. But domestic terrorism would be an enhancement, meaning that this would be another reason where you could seek the death penalty and engage in additional sentencing enhancements. I think that they certainly will seek a domestic terrorism label on this case, which will pave the way for additional investigative resources as well as the ability to obtain and likely receive the death penalty in a case like this.
I would want to ask, because the FBI, and this has been a question that I've asked several different experts here, they did describe this as a quote unquote lone gunman, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's no potential accomplices or I guess a bigger network here. It just means that he was, according to investigators, the only one to carry out the attack, correct?
Yeah, the label of acting alone or lone gunman would be way too quickly applied if that is being talked about right now. Certainly, this was the only individual who came forward. If there were others coordinating the attack, we likely would have seen other attacks in different locations. That may not be the case here. This person may have simply acted alone. That being said, many cases in which individuals were radicalized by what might have happened on the internet. They were part of some group that may have been involved in radicalization. This person may have received some sort of propaganda. And mind you, it is important to note that assisting in an act of terrorism and being in an organization that engages in acts of terrorism, even if one of your members does it, is a federal offense and can be separately subject to the death penalty. So electronic devices, email, chat accounts, they're going to be collected to see who this individual was talking to, and there will be other individuals investigated. Most likely, these individuals do not act alone in that sense. Normally, they're in communication with other folks, so there may be other charges pending here against other individuals.
When you talk about a case like this that so many people are paying very close attention to, not just over in D.C. where it happened, but nationwide, and it's also getting international media attention, how do you ensure that there's no kind of connection there and influence from any kind of political pressure?
Very, very difficult. I'm just about to head down to a trial in a case where there's been a ton of political pressure in the case. Very difficult to select a jury, especially inside of the District of Columbia, where a lot of federal officials may feel like they could be targeted by a very similar attack. Oklahoma City is a great example here. We had the courthouse literally shook by the bomb, and the prosecution was supposed to happen in that specific courthouse. No way a fair jury could happen. So the case was moved, I believe, all the way to Colorado. And that very well may happen here. You could see the case moved somewhere in Virginia, somewhere else in Virginia, or maybe moved to another area. That may help you get a little bit more of a fair jury. That being said, when we deal with national security cases like this, it's difficult to get a fair jury. It's important that we stick to the rule of law in a case like this, that we understand the evidence and we understand proof, and we don't blur those boundaries so that we can make sure that we protect the Constitution as well as the citizens of the United States.
Going a little bit deeper here, we know that the suspect is still hospitalized there with serious injuries. That's according to investigators. However, Janine Pirro saying that the charge is going to be first-degree murder. That's an upgraded charge. What has to happen now? Can the suspect actually be charged and arraigned while they're in the hospital, or does that have to kind of wait until after he is released?
Yes, arraignment is in a hospital is not an unusual thing. Actually happens all the time. We could see a magistrate judge go there with a court reporter, and defense counsel will be present, likely appointed counsel from the public defender's office over there, and we will see the arraignment happen. There's two other options. You could do a video arraignment of this individual, very easy and quick. In fact, that may be what happens here. But there's one separate option. It's possible that instead of going through the prospect of arraignment right now, that the defense, if they cooperate, may agree to waive an arraignment or the time that would take to go to a preliminary examination until he gets into a position where he can sit inside of a courthouse. And that would be a good option for the defense to pursue, so that there's not an early court appearance before he's conscious, can fully understand his rights, and can appear next to counsel in a courtroom.
All right. Ronald Chapman there, host of Off Air over on YouTube, and he's also a legal expert who we talked to several different times here. Anything else you want to add? Anything we missed before I let you go?
No, I just have to say that it's very important as the American public to make sure that we look at the facts and that we're not blinded by the label of a terrorist action here. There may be others. There may be more investigation to do. And I'm sure as this information develops, there's going to be a lot more to digest about this case.
All right. Thank you again for taking the time to be here with us on this Saturday. We definitely appreciate it.
Thank you.